the stock market is doing, I guess it's up 35% since the election. And now I think really they're waiting to see what's going to happen on trade, because we're going to have some incredible trade deals announced. My people are coming back right now from China, and we will be doing something one way or the other with respect to what's happening in China.
President Trump touting the market ahead of a potential trade deal with China, hinting that the U.S. won't take mediocrity for an answer. The delegation determined to bring home some major trade policy wins and vowing to maintain an aggressive stance with these hardline demands that they've rolled out thus far. Joining me now to discuss, Jillian Melcher, Wall Street Journal editorial page writer, along with Steve Dudash, president of IHT Wealth Management. Steve, first of all, there were two things there. President Trump spoke really highly of a possible trade deal, but also spoke highly of President Xi. We heard that before when the North and South met, North Korea and South Korea met, but also he mentioned the word stock market, or the term stock market. I hadn't heard that in a long time, and the market took off right after that.
You know, you can say what you want about the presidency, and there are flaws. We all know that. But the reality is the guy's a professional negotiator, and he has been his whole life. This is just negotiating ploys. Hard line in the sand, back off. Hard line in the sand, back off. We've seen it with North Korea. We've seen it with companies like Amazon, even Boeing a year ago. It's what they do. They say we're going to do this, and then they find a way to negotiate to a middle or some sort of common ground. And that's the part that your viewers really should remember here. And not to oversimplify this, but in the next few months, I promise there's going to be a day with some dramatic headline about trade war, and the market's going to pull back 2 or 3% on that day. That's a screaming buy signal. That's when you guys should be taking advantage of it. No one wants a trade war. They don't. We don't. There's not dumb people doing this. Take advantage of those dips when they happen, because they're going to happen more often as time goes on.
Jillian, how do you see it playing out?
Well, I do think there is certainly some negotiation tactics at play, but I think negotiating in a diplomatic setting is different than negotiating in a business setting, and I do have some concerns about that. So I think right now what we've seen is a very high-level team go over. We're talking 3 White House advisors, 3 different administration members.
Do you think there were too many messages among that team?
I do. I think it was really mixed up. I mean, even the team couldn't agree what the objectives were. So I think that makes it really difficult to have even points to negotiate with China. And I also am concerned about the focus on the trade deficit. That's not the central problem. The central problem is China's bad behavior, that it's subsidizing industries, that it's stealing intellectual property, that it's keeping U.S. industries out of China. And I think those are the things that should be discussed, but there's no indication that there's that kind of focus.
Well, they did mention they had an 8-point plan, Steve, and they did have some of those things on that plan. And I would suspect that for China, which is trying to transition from an export-driven economy to a domestic-driven economy, it'd be time for them to start lowering some of their very high tariffs that are already in place.
Of course. I mean, they had those tariffs in place for decades because they were trying to build up their economy and get themselves to a point where they are now, or getting there, where they are getting to be more well-rounded economy, so they can break down some of those tariffs and be able to handle it as a country. And to your guest's point, you're right. This is more political than it is business, but the reality is it's all the same thing these days. You know, our presidency isn't really about the politics part. It's about the business part, at least I hope it is. And negotiating with China is all about business.
Right,
They are all about driving their economy up, which is where
to be honest, the diplomatic process is very different, especially when you're dealing with a country like China, which has been pretty adept and pretty nimble. That's different than unilaterally as a business leader making those decisions.
Well, what about the idea of negotiating? One second, Steve. Let me jump in, because I really believe if we're talking about also negotiating with the dictator or an emperor of sorts. So, I mean, doesn't Trump have to be extraordinarily strong or ham-fisted to more so than, let's say, if he was negotiating with the president of Sweden?
Well, I think that also makes it more difficult for him to negotiate. I mean, the deal that China has essentially struck with its people is you surrender your political liberty and we'll give you economic prosperity. So the thing that would be the threat to that dictator's power is anything threatening their economic progress. So I think it's an existential threat that's going to make the negotiation much more difficult.
Right.
But
guys, hold on one second,
because they don't want to have the trade war?
We've got more breaking news I've got to share with the audience. This is coming from Reuters, the U.S. Geological Society.